Austraeoh, Chapters 6 and 7. Rainbow Dash thought it was a boulder at first. However, as she flew closer towards the object on top of the hill, it turned out to be hollow. Her goggled eyes finally made out what could only be splintery spokes of wood and the crumbling mortar frame of a fireplace. There was no second thought to it. She shifted her wings, coasted down, and dove towards the site. The abandoned cabin was located quite literally in the middle of nowhere. Rainbow Dash had since passed over two sharp mountain ranges. Here, a shallow ravine ran north and south, splotched over with thin grass and green shrubbery. In the center of this ravine, surrounded on all sides by forests and mountains, was a lone, run-down cottage. It was as alien could be, and it called to her like a kindred spirit. She touched down in a flat yard of grass bordering the cabin. Blades of grass splattered her limbs with cold dew as she trotted slowly around the structure. The golden glow of early morning electrified the scene with a rising platinum mist. Stray butterflies took off and fled lazily from Rainbow's presence as she approached the doorframe to the crumbled house. Standing upon the threshold, Rainbow raised her shaded goggles and stared nakedly upon the junk-laden interior of the place. There was no surviving ceiling, so every bit of the cabin's contents had been soaked to the brim with moisture, mildew, and the mountain's perpetual breath of fog. There was a bed in the corner, its rusted springs overgrown with vines and flowers. A tattered mattress had spilled over. It must have once made a home for winged creatures, judging from the threadbare nests half stuffed in its fluffy folds. The fireplace was full of dried logs, painted over with green mold and algae. Rainbow Dash wondered who had left the pieces of lumber there, as if some pony was once planning on a peaceful evening alone. She glanced around the lengths of the place. There was no sign of another soul having been there for ages. She could only wonder just how old the house was, or why it had been built in such a remote place to begin with. Every hoof step she took sent crackling noises through the crumbled domain, tearing down countless years of abandoned history beneath her twitching ears. Her eyes fell over a sea of shattered dinner plates. The slightest hint of floral designs across the porcelain material glistened in the neutral sunrise. Rainbow Dash let loose a strong exhale. The more she looked, the more detritus and rubble there appeared to be. She glanced at the top of the fireplace and saw what looked to be a picture frame. She marched over and raised a hoof to the object, tilting it up so that its canvas surface once again graced the light of day. All that spoke to her was brown mildew, except for a few stray lines etched in the shape of what she could only determine to be the Royal Celestial Crest. The moment she saw those solar bands, she dropped the picture frame like a brick to the uneven floor. Her nostrils flared. Spinning around, she trotted firmly back towards the doorframe of the cabin's entrance. Just as she was about to take off, her peripheral vision caught something. She glanced aside, squinted, then knelt down low. In the wooden surface of the broken doorway were two initials, carved within the unmistakable outline of a heart, EE and EG. Rainbow Dash's lips pursed. Her wings flexed briefly. She wondered who could have left those initials, how old they could have been, if the pony who first etched them there could still be alive or not. She pondered over how many ages had gone by, cold winters and dew-laden summers, during which those lone and seemingly insignificant letters had lingered lonesomely, abandoned in the vacuum of two steep mountain ranges, only for one soul, and one soul alone, to eventually stumble upon them. Were they made for her? Could she have possibly given them the proper attention that they deserved? Were the souls who scratched them into the annals of history properly vindicated from their existence? Rainbow Dash had flown by herself over valleys, mountains, rivers, and plateaus. She had pierced the penumbra of stars and the pale gaze of the moon. Only now did she feel suddenly and hideously alone. A lump formed in her throat. The pendant weighed heavily. She trotted numbly away from the cabin like a pony possessed. Suddenly, though, she stopped. Her head lifted up, her mane being caught in a warm gust of morning air. She turned around, stared at the cabin again, and smirked. Firmly, she trotted into the cottage. She fetched several of the logs that had been left in the fireplace. Opening her saddlebag, she pulled her metal hatchet out and clamped it in her teeth. Using the instrument with expert precision, she hammered 4 of the logs into the ground so that they acted as signposts. Next, She pulled loose a fallen panel of oak from the cabin itself. She slid this over and propped it in between the 4 logs. She gazed proudly at her work. Not even the strongest blizzard could shove this erect plank of lumber down. Next, she squatted before the wooden panel and aimed carefully with the sharp edge of her hatchet. With strong teeth, she leaned forward, back, left and right, so that she etched several sharp lines against the pale surface of oak. It took the better part of an hour, but she was convinced that what she had made would last for decades. Once her work was done, she slid the hatchet back into her saddlebag, took a few steps back, and stared at the panel. 5 names shone in the golden light cascading across the valley. The sign was arranged so that the letters would catch the sunlight at both dawn and sunset. It didn't make Rainbow Dash feel any less lonely, but the sight felt a great deal holier than it was before she had arrived. Satisfied with her task, she turned her back to the names, stretched her goggles over her face, and soared sunward, allowing the heat of the birthing day to melt her thoughts into obscurity. Three hours into the early morning, and Rainbow Dash had passed over 2 more mountain ranges. The rough topography was rather surprising to her. She briefly wondered if the map in her saddlebag was anywhere remotely accurate, for there was far too much uneven earth that she had covered, and she yet still hadn't even stumbled upon the last 2 or 3 landmarks marked on the east end of the illustration. What was more, the rocky peaks stabbed remarkably high into the air, breaking the clouds and disseminating the moisture so that a heated bubble of vapors gathered along the eastern slope. More hours went by, during which Rainbow Dash witnessed rapid convection as she pierced the hot air. Sooner than she had hoped, she heard a loud rumble filling the troposphere around her. She glanced left and right, finding herself surrounded by black, anvil-shaped thunderclouds. A groan escaped her lips as the first of several hot drops of moisture began to fall. Her wings were growing damp, the air tingled with the threatening hint of electricity. There was no way of avoiding it. She had to put her rapid flight on hold and find some cover. Gazing down, Rainbow Dash adjusted her goggles so that the clear lenses gave her an unobstructed view of the world below. Dense trees had given way to dry bush. There was no vegetation tall enough or spacious enough to give her a natural ceiling. So, beginning to grow desperate, she dove low and skimmed the west side of the craggy hilltops just beneath her. She studied every nook and cranny of the bouldery landscape, desperate for an enclosure that could keep her from becoming soaking wet. To her gasping surprise, she stumbled upon such a niche. It was a cave, immeasurably deep, with a grand black entrance that entreated her like a Clouds Daily in atrium. The world rumbled loudly behind her. Rainbow Dash started to feel her coat hair standing on end, something sparked by the queer sensation of cold winds pierced by hot rain. She had lost track of time, and she briefly wondered if summer had crept up on her. Wasting no time, she darted straight for the cave. There was a flash of bright light in her peripheral vision, forcing her heart to jump. When she stood in the enclosure, she gazed out, panting, in time to embrace a wave of vibrations as the dipping valley below the rocky hill yelled from the storm's immensity. She gulped, breathed easier, and managed a deep chuckle. Rainbow Dash sat on her haunches and watched as the world turned gray. The dark flanks of the overhead storm clouds dipped down to kiss the earth, and soon there was a siphonous hiss of moisture pooling over the empty landscape as far as she could see. Her wings fluttered a few times to shake off the loose droplets, and then closed in on her sides. She had made it to the cave on time. Reveling in her miraculous dryness, she gazed at the rain-soaked world like a mare might sit at a theater show. This was just as entertaining, soothing even, and the roar of the precipitation lent her gentle heartbeats a pleasant ambiance. Half an hour passed, and Rainbow's antsy nature got the best of her. She stood up, turned around, and faced into the dark recesses of the cave. She raised the goggles and blinked widely into what turned out to be a black expanse. Marching forward, she came to a point where she was no longer gifted with the vestiges of daylight. There, she stopped and whistled. The echo that replied was formidable to say the least. She couldn't help but wonder just how deep the cave was. She needed light. In a practiced ritual, Rainbow Dash stood still, took a meditative breath, and rammed a hoof up to the ruby lightning bolt of her neck pendant. Once making contact, she spun concentric circles and murmured something to the stale air of the place. It took a few seconds, but a deep red glow came to life from within the gemstone. A dim crimson spotlight was cast before her, growing brighter by the blink, until the walls and floor of the rocky enclosure took shape. Rainbow Dash did a double take. What she originally thought was a cave actually turned out to be a tunnel. The red light went down the distance of 50 feet, and then blackness once more layered the extremity of the natural corridor. There was no telling just how deep the passage went, or what may have been lurking within. It would have been very unwise to blindly trek down. Rainbow smiled. She glanced behind her at the bright world turned gray with rain. With a flick of her tail, she abandoned the stormy afternoon, choosing instead to trot firmly down the dark corridor. As her hooves scraped against the polished rock, the world rumbled again. For the briefest moment, however, Rainbow Dash imagined that the thunder was coming from below instead of above. She shrugged the thought off, adjusted the saddlebag on her spine, and quickened her descent.